So welcome to our Q&A kind of walkthrough of our authentication mini project. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through a potential solution to refactoring some work that our API is doing for us, and kind of walking you through some of the obfuscated code that exists in here. And it's the author who wrote this did a really good job. This is very similar to production code that I would see in many places, you know, where you have some helper functions like a user error function or a query and then function. So find the thing and then do something with it. So you know, this is work that is written once and used all over the application. So if you notice here, send user error is a method, is a function that's being used everywhere. Same thing with query and then. It's a method that's being used over and over again inside of our application. Okay? So what we talked about in our video this morning was this idea of building your own custom middleware to offload work from potential matching routes. Or if you had some sort of work that, you know, could be shared across routes and the routes looked exactly the same, but you were, you know, sort of expecting this work to be done. So for example, what I'm getting at is we have this query string, or sorry, this parameter object on our request object body, right? So we can say rec.params and look at the params of our URL that we're requesting and find that SOID. So this would be an object or a key value pair that gets stored on the request body, or the request param body. The request params object, I should say. Body is a confusing word inside of node land, because body means something to us that it doesn't necessarily mean to everything else. Body is big because we use the body to pull stuff off when we send up resources, right? Excuse me. Okay, so if you look at this function right here, and let's see if I can get this to. So this function right here where we're saying with a Stack Overflow ID that comes in, find one by the Stack Overflow ID. So whatever returns from this query and then function, pass it the response, and then pass it the callback, right? So query and then, if you look at it, it actually takes an actual Mongo query, and then it executes that Mongo query, okay? Based on the results of that Mongo query, it will do one of two things. It will either call some sort of error that we're handling up here, okay? Or it will actually take a result that we get back from the database and send it back to our callback, which will become this right here. All that stuff right there. So that callback that we're doing all of this stuff in, essentially what I'm getting at is this is work that could be taken care of in a middleware fashion, because it's the same exact thing as this, right? Even our error messages are the exact same. Could not find post with the given ID. So we have two pieces of work, or one piece of work that's being written twice. So because of that, we could literally, and if you want to see that they exactly match, I just did a Command D on my keyboard to show like the next occurrence of this line of code, and that's a lot of code to be repeated. So we can literally take this work and offload it into some middleware. Okay. Now, if you were to just run a yarn install and then a yarn test or whatever, you would notice that you're going to pass all of your tests. So if I run a yarn test, it ought to give me 9 out of 9 tests passed. There we go. Okay, we're all passing. We have a happy Nyan cat. Everything is good. Okay, it just means that this work passes the assignment from the previous time that it was done, it was used. Okay, so whoever wrote this, which was Karthik, put together this solution. It's crafted in actually a pretty clever way, but yeah, it's good. Everything's good here. But we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna take this work and we're gonna offload it into some middleware. Okay, because the work is shared between both of these routes. Okay, so my question to you: do I want this work right here to be built into global middleware that I use the .use function for, or ought it be specific local middleware that is tied to the actual route route URL? Is it local or global that I want to build here? Okay, got to vote for local. Couple other locals, local as well. Okay. Now the other follow-up question, why would we not want this to be global? If that's the case, if you're going to choose local, then why? Why do we want this to be specific to these URLs? Yeah, it's the same work that is justified for this particular type of requested route, right? We're requesting a resource with this params. This param object does not exist on this query. So what's going to happen here when somebody queries for this, somebody hits the URL for this? What's going to happen? If we had it as a global middleware, what's going to happen on this route? Because we're not going to send anything up. So like when we're requesting these routes, so let's look at this real quick. When we're requesting these routes, we're sending some long, Stack Overflow ID that is congruent to an object that's found in our database, right? That matches up with that object ID. So if that's not defined there, there's not going to be anything here. I guess in this case, so if it was global, we would hit this route, and then what would happen? Our global middleware would fire, and then what are we going to get? What kind of error are we going to get at that point? Because what are we trying to do? It's going to say what? This rec.params.soid. It's not defined, right? It'll only be defined if we send it up as a query string, right? So if this was global middleware and all of our routes had this plugged in, then we're going to break the system, right? The system's going to be like, hey, I don't know what this SOID thing is, then you're trying to perform some work on. And this SOID thing is only there on the routes where we're actually defining it. So that is why we would want it to be local as opposed to global, okay? All right, so what should we call our little worker middleware function that we're going to write? We get to name it. We get to choose. It's customized. It's built for us. What are we going to call it? Yeah, let's call it some local middleware. What if we called it local query middleware? Because that's essentially what it's doing, right? Okay. So what are the homies that I'm passing in here? Yeah, yeah, just call it middleware. Rec, res, and next. Rec and res are objects. What is next? We have a request object, we have the response object, and then we have, it's kind of like a promise. It's a callback. And a lot of times callbacks are used as promises. So I'll give you 100% benefit of the doubt on that. So it's a callback function, right? So this, potentially when next gets called, we can then step into the next particular route that we need to move, or to the next particular middleware, I mean. Okay, so next is a callback. It's a callback function. This will become a function at the time that our local middleware is called. So by the time we receive our request and response body, next will be called. Okay, so now we can literally take this work and we can delete it. And then I have to get rid of one of these open and closing parens there. And let's see, yep, cleaned it up. And then we have a couple of problems, but nothing we can't resolve pretty quickly. I need to say close that as well. So that is literally the only work that we needed to pull out, which means we're going to take it out of here as well. Because remember, wherever we're sending up a Stack Overflow ID as a request parameter, okay, that's where we're going to have this middleware fire. Okay, so I'm going to take this out, refactor this, get rid of one of these lines, and then just do a little bit of formatting there. Okay, but you notice like my instantly my editor is like, you got some stuff that's not defined. We were defining that post stuff like you were doing up here. You know, post was something that was defined as this, right? Because post was coming back from our callback. So now that we're not in that callback land, we need to redefine what this post points to. Okay, so let's step through the logic of this middleware, and then I'm going to have you guys tell me what I need to do to be able to plug this middleware in and then allow these other middlewares to have access to that post. So what we're going to kind of think about that in each individual step. So the first step, I want to walk us through this query and then function. Okay, query and then is taking a legitimate Mongo query. Okay, and it's saying we're going to find something by an ID. Okay, so find one record in our database. And so we can come in here, we're passing that Mongo query to our query and then function. So because of that, we can call .exec on it. Does that make sense? Like, maybe just like, let's do a quick, like 1 through 5, like how much sense? And this one, I'm going to make sure that I turn on anonymous legitimately. And a 1 through 5, this is completely, a 1 would be like, I know nothing about what you just said. Please repeat it. And a 5 would be like, that's actually pretty clear. And I could teach it to somebody who's learning Mongo. Cool. Initially, most of us are in the middle and other half. So I'll just repeat it real quick, and I think we can do it justice to move forward at that point. So what we're doing to this query and then function is we're passing a query, a Mongo search query, to the function. It becomes this query parameter here. And then we say query.exec. If there's an error, then handle that error with this function. Otherwise, give us the result from that query function and call it back with the callback that's coming in, which is this callback right here. So that work was repeated across 2 routes, and it doesn't need to be in a route. It could be right here in middleware. Okay? So if you want to go ahead and change your vote now to see if you understand that a little bit better, if that's a little bit more clear. So once again, we send that query up. We execute the query. If there's an error, we tell the server about it, or their client about it. If they're good, if the result comes back, then we have a result from the database that we can send forward to our callback, which is going to be here. And then we're just going to say, oh, well, if this thing is actually null, which is what this is kind of checking for, then we're just going to send the user error back. Okay? If it's not there, we're gonna actually call an error at that point. Otherwise, we can do something with that response. Okay? Which is what we're going to have to do at this next portion. What is the value of post? Post will be the result that comes back from the Mongo database. Okay? So a result that comes back when we execute the query, we either send an error, that Mongo is broken, sorry, there's an error, we're going to send that back to the user, okay? Or we send back the actual object that we requested. In this case, it's a Stack Overflow post. So that's why we call it post, because that's what we're expecting it to come back. But it's this result. Whatever the query, it's the result of this query here, this work. Okay? And we can just, since it's a function, we can just send it across the world wide web of JavaScript, right? We can send it through as a parameter somewhere. Okay? Okay, let's press forward on this because the good stuff is coming. So what happens if post is defined? What do we want to do with post? Well, what if we just actually console.log post, and then we're going to get some other, so I'm just going to say const post equals this, just to stop breaking our code. Okay, so right now these are just going to be empty strings, and it's going to still fail the tests, but it's not going to break the code. And then we're just going to call next, and then I need to feed this middleware into my routes. Okay. Doesn't like the format. Okay, cool. And then we're just going to look at post. Let's look at what happens with post. Okay. So, cool, because it's going to be an object. Okay, cool. So let's just look at what post is going to be. Well, I just told you what it's going to be because I had to think about it. Got a couple warnings, an unexpected console statement, and let's see what we get out of here. Okay, so here's our Stack Overflow posts. So check it out. We have this large Stack Overflow post, and then this one. So the query is working the way that we thought it would work. Okay, and it's performing its work a few times, which is why we're getting kind of a messy console. All right, but then what's the thing that these posts have in common? What are we actually looking for off of these posts? Well, I'll tell you, it's this field right here, this accepted answer ID. Okay, and you see the times that we're actually hitting this middleware and we're testing for the positive result, we actually have an accepted answer as an ID. So then we can use that and query for something else. Okay. All right, so we're getting something back from the database from our middleware. Our middleware is actually getting something back. So now, what do I need to do with that post in order to the next time that I step into this middleware to make it be available? Where do I need to put that? I need to save it somewhere so I can have access to it in the next place. What object do I have? Which one of the homies do I have at my disposal that will allow me to write information to it? Post. So I'm going to save the post. Where? Where am I going to save this post? I could put it in a session. I don't need to. We don't have a session at our disposal right now because we're not including it, but I could just put it right on the rec.post, right, Terry? Perfect. So I could just create, remember, request is just an object. Request is just this, const rec equals this object. So there's going to be a body, which is going to be, whatever the user passes. There's going to be potentially a session later on, right, when we get into sessions. There's going to be params. This is what a request object would look like in Node land, right? It's not very, at a high level, this is very high level stuff, not very deep as far as what else exists on that object. It's a huge, huge context, right? But yeah, we get all this. So I can just say something like rec.body equals my post or whatever, rec.post, I'm sorry. So I can say rec.post equals post, and that's going to create a post and set it equal to whatever we get back, whatever comes back. Right? So whatever this object is, we can just set that on the request object itself. Okay? So let's do it. I'm actually going to copy and paste that. Okay, so now I've modified the request object. And then as I call next, from the first time that this runs, local query middleware, the first time that this runs in this demonstration, what line of code is next going to bump me into? Next is going to push me into what line of code right after this? In my editor, what line of code is next going to call and put me into? Yeah, 42. So you could say 42, yep. And then in between this body, right? So between 42 and 52. Yeah, line 43 that's I was looking for either of those. Yeah, so we're going to say next, local query middleware, next, okay? So now, what do we need to do for post in order to make this code work? Because right now it's referencing a string and it's going to make a big mess of our tests. We need to call it rec.post, right? So post equals rec.post. Because we set that through our middleware. So then the next time we call, we're going to set this. We're going to send up an ID and it's going to change it, rec.post. And now we can go and sort and do all of our fun stuff, our aggregate stuff here, our sorting stuff. Filtering. Cool. Let's see if that worked. This is not trivial stuff, guys. This is not stuff that's like the super easiest stuff to do. And if you look, we're passing all of our tests like we normally were. And all we've done is abstract away some work that is being shared between two routes, okay? Between two routes that are the same, they're requesting the same parameter and doing the same work. So we share that between routes and they do something different with it. I mean, well, they do the same thing, but like you could pass a Stack Overflow ID that's different to this route than you could for this route, right? And so we're querying for different things, but we have the same exact query. Sharing my code is caring. Absolutely, this is a mini assignment. I'm more than happy to share it for mini assignment. The only time we won't share code as staff members, just FYI, will be during your assessments, your sprint challenges, okay? That's where we want to see you do as much work on your own as possible with no intervention. We can code a solution in front of you, but we won't physically give you the code, okay? I know, it's Mad Panda. What is this Patrick bot? This thing is awesome. I've been noticing it all day. Okay, now, that being said, what questions do you have for me? Once again, this is not trivial work. I have had to solve this mini assignment like 6 times in front of students. And, I've still gone and referenced code over and over again. So it's not like I am like the champion of this type of stuff, but I may have made it look easy and talked you through it, but it still is stuff that I have to think about all the time. He's always there. That's awesome. How do I create an object and add it to a database after hashing a password? Okay, Richard, that's a good question. So if I was to look at, let's see what I have here. So if I was to create an object and then hash a password and save it to a database, it would look a lot like the work that I provided earlier. But if I were to say, let's say I have, let's pseudocode this out. So you get a hand here, okay? So pseudocoding this out, I would say, let's say server.post, and let's say we have a post to create hash, and then we're going to throw in the homies, right? No need for any middleware here. We're just going to hash a password and save it. We're going to pull off some sort of, so what I would do is say, pull off requested resource body. So that would be like a username, password from rec.body. Hash the password and capture in a variable or something, or inside the callback of that hashed password. So hash the password. Remember we learned that race condition earlier. Inside callback of bcrypt.hash. Okay. I would then say create object that exemplifies the rec.body. So username hashed password from bcrypt. And then I'd call user, or whatever my database says, .save, or const user equals new user. User.save, perform normal logic here. Now, if you can figure this piece out, it's just like everything else you've ever done in Mongo, creating a user, creating an object. It's the same thing. The only difference, yes, the Mongo's object ID will be created, will default. It'll just get created when you create a resource. When you create a document in Mongo, you get that object underscore ID for free. That underscore ID, long hash Mongo ID, if that doesn't exist, Mongo doesn't exist, okay? it puts it on there for free for you as long as you are calling new schema model. Okay, new schema model means create a new instance. Okay, boom, create a new instance with all this data, username and password, and then store this underscore ID object so I can reference that data later. So then you have that underscore ID object, you can throw it up and pass it up and find that by ID, right? Super easy. Just like we're doing find by Stack Overflow IDs, find one, you could do a find by ID or find one. Okay, so once you figure this out, this would be the creating the hash portion. Okay, that's going to take in your username and password. You're going to generate the hash. Inside of the callback of that hash, save that user to the document. Okay, and then let's see. And then you want to, and then you'll look in your database. You could do a quick query in your database and find any user or all the users, and you'll see that their passwords are in hash text. Yeah, the callback is the tricky part. Let's reference my code from earlier so you can see it. Let's go up to my special gist from earlier. Gist. Okay. Bcrypt. So here it is. Yep, here it is, actually. Bcrypt.hash, plain text password, number of salt rounds, cost, right? There's the callback. Notice in here, I'm doing just a quick check on that error. If there's an error encrypting the password, you should probably know about it. You should probably handle it in some way. Otherwise, we just want to push the new object into our database. This is where you would do db.save or user.save. Okay? Make sure that you're not saving the plain text password, but the hash password instead. And then compare is pretty much just this logic, or this logic shoved into this. So real quick, somebody is unmuted. I'm not sure who it is. Muting all. Found it. Cool. All right. Does that make sense? So this logic here would be like checking your encrypted stuff. You're gonna have to reference the documentation a little bit. That looks pretty much what you're looking for. If that's not working, before you send the JSON back to the server, you should console.log in your .then block and see what saved user looks like. Okay. I would just, yeah, and there may be a typo, but let me see here. Okay, bcrypt.hash, password, give it 11 rounds. Error, password hash. If error, throw new error. You may want to make sure, and then are you querying your database? Because you can just go straight into your Mongo instance through your Mongo shell and just do that. Yeah, that might be it too. You may need to set password as password hash or whatever the schema is looking for. So check your schema too. Okay, any other good questions? That's a good one. Okay, question about the auth. Let's hear it. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I muted myself to take a drink of water. So Igor, to answer your question, and it looks like it kind of got resolved, is right here. Just put those things together. And then, yeah, for those who were not, able to see what we were looking at when we were talking about Richard's code, it was this block of code that we were referencing earlier. Those who watch this recording later. Okay. So yeah, Igor, if you want those to go away, those are just simply warnings telling you that you need to have these because the default is deprecated. Cool beans? Yeah, no problem. Okay. So tomorrow, what I'm going to do in the morning, I'm going to go through kind of how to get this project off the ground and make sure everyone's up to a good spot. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to ensure that you know about how to use like a little bit of like abstracted regex in JavaScript, so you can potentially lean towards solving the solution, the stretch problem. And I'm also going to show you how to validate passwords at the schema level. So when I say schema level, I mean Mongoose we can actually use bcrypt at the Mongoose schema level, which is something that from here on out in your application, you should always do. Yep, in the model. It's fantastic. So we'll go over that stuff tomorrow morning for tomorrow morning's kind of guided demo and deeper dive, and we'll talk about the concepts as we go. But if you guys have any questions from here until now, it looks like we're good to go. But if you have anything right now, I can answer them. But let me know if you need anything. Yep. How do you response.json off of that? So if you look at let's go to bcrypt docs. So as long as you're in some sort of middleware, you should have the res and the rec and res object, right? So bcrypt simply does a compare. Whoops, let's see. Maybe I can get us some real estate here. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. So bcrypt.compare takes our plaintext password and our hash. That's the then. I don't care for promises as much right here when this code is going on. But then we have a callback. The error would be that something broke down in bcrypt, so you need to know about it. But then, if there's no error, you want to check. If we get a true, then handle it the right way. Then you could validate that that user is the right user. And how would you validate that the user is the right user? Well, you could save that information on your session. By the way, the session code that I was trying to write, when I was trying to save my name or whatever to the rec.session, it was just going to save my name to any client that was requesting that. So I wasn't thinking. So what I did is I went ahead and I refactored this session code. And if you make a request from Postman and Chrome, you'll notice that the cookie is different. That gets sent up in the headers, okay? Don't worry too much about this code right here, other than the fact that you know that there are two different clients that you're dealing with because one is sending from different location. And then we could say that this is a different session for either client, okay? So that's the rewrite there, and I gave you that link to that earlier. But yeah, here you would just check. If we get a true, that user is who we think they are, they have the right password, then we can do something with that session and say, user can stay there. Else, user is not authenticated, 403 that bad boy and send that response back to the client. Okay. The right place to validate or hash a password will be in what I teach you tomorrow. So your suspense, I mean, there is no, as long as the password's hashed, there is no wrong place to hash a password, in my opinion. I think a really good place to hash it is on the model itself. And we can do that because it's a constructor function, so we can just put that functionality right into our schema object. And it's going to be cool. You're going to be stoked. If you're looking to disable ESLint, go ahead and head over to your package.json file and just take out anything that says ESLint. So just run the mocha tests, and then you won't even link to your files anymore. Okay? So just tweak your test function to only run Mocha. Everything between the and the ampersands. You're welcome. Okay, gang. Have a good evening, afternoon, and in case I don't see you, just kidding. I love Truman Show. It's like I just watched it the other day. It's great. Okay, we'll talk to you guys very soon. Please DM project managers. Throw your questions out in the help channel. If things are just need to be escalated to me, I'm around. I'm just going to be continuously improving on the curriculum and running trainings. So we'll talk to you guys very soon. Let me know if you need anything at all. Looks like Patrick's around too, so he's about to say something wise. There we go. Have fun. We'll talk to you guys bright and early if I don't see you before then.